Hey everyone, welcome to another operations video. We will be discussing maintenance and reliability. Before we get into the actual content, let's talk about a woman that went on a plane ride. So she boarded the plane, sat down, and started to smell some coffee. She thought, oh, that's nice. They're going to serve coffee before we head out. Then she noticed that nobody was actually having coffee. When she looked over on the side, she saw right next to the window, right below, there was a big smudge of coffee, big coffee stain right there. As soon as she noticed that, she started freaking out. Eyes grew. She started to panic. And even though the plane was ready to take off, she just demanded she needed to leave the plane. Finally she made a huge scene and made quite a huge delay, but definitely happy to get off that plane. So why did she leave the plane? Why was she so insistent on leaving that plane? Well, we'll revisit that story. Let's get into today. Before we talk about maintenance and reliability, why not define what we mean by the two? So when we're discussing maintenance, we're really making sure that our equipment, our service, right, particularly in the service industry, is working properly. So we need to maintain whatever system that we are trying to use to provide service, or what equipment we're using. Now, reliability, think of this more about in regards to probability, right? So this is now the probability that the equipment is actually working properly, right? So this is what I mean by how reliable a equipment or service is. So that's why it's important to particularly think about probability when we're thinking about reliability. So in this video, we'll come up with 3 ways we can actually improve our system's reliability. How can we do that? And we'll start with redundancy. In other words, having a backup. Okay, now you might be familiar with micros, and it's not you're not seeing double. There's a reason why we have 2 up here, and that going back to this concept of redundancy, the idea of having 2 of the same systems working. Just like you have a backup generator, same idea with the micros. So believe it or not, a lot of restaurants will have a backup micros server because if one goes down, they have a backup in the second instance. So it sounds kind of obvious, sounds intuitive, but this is one way that we can improve a reliability and ensure that we have our systems working. It's no different than if you had a paper that you needed to write. Now, back in the day, we might have printed it off to have it as a hard copy, but now we just rely on the cloud or a server up there. But we want to make sure that we have another way to access that paper. Same idea. You're just making a backup. And what we call that is redundancy. So with that said, I'm sure we can answer this true or false question. Does providing redundancy improve systems reliability? And I'm sure most of you will say true to this. Absolutely. Now the question is, can you prove it? And we'll spend a little bit more time on that in class, seeing if there's a way to actually calculate or prove that in fact redundancy can provide a higher rate of reliability. So that's number 1. Another way to improve systems reliability is a little bit after the fact, okay, but this concept of breakdown maintenance. So of course, breakdown maintenance is after a system has broken. How quickly we can respond to it, how quickly can we fix it. Believe it or not, this will actually help with reliability moving forward. Okay, so I'll give you an example. As you can see here, we're looking at a restaurant. Now, some of you might recognize that this restaurant is located in Toronto. You can see the CN Tower on the left-hand side there. And if maybe some of you might be familiar with the restaurant, this is a restaurant called Canoe. And at the time that I was working there, we were actually the number 1 restaurant in Canada. Okay, now that had nothing to do with me, so I'm not trying to brag or anything. But I do want to point out that it was a very well-established restaurant. And actually, at the time, the picture that you see here, we used to hold weddings on the weekends. Okay, so we closed down the restaurant, had weddings on the weekend. So they had a very good name, very good reputation. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because we had an issue with one of our weddings. So what happened was, we had the wedding start. one of the menu items, the main menu item, was a grilled tenderloin on the menu, beef tenderloin. And as the wedding began, we had a challenge. None of the ovens would start. None of the grills would start, specifically the grills. And, we had an issue with that because obviously this was a grilled tenderloin, and we wanted to make sure that we were delivering what was promised to the guests. And again, this is obviously a wedding is a very important scenario, very important experience for our guests. We have a good reputation. So what did we do in that instance? None of the grills were working. What to do? And there's a pause here because I don't know. What would you have done? So what we end up doing was, again, we didn't want to compromise the integrity of our menu by, figuring out a different way to cook it. We didn't want the guests to know. Okay, that's definitely something we didn't want to tell. So what we ended up doing is we took our tenderloins and we went all the way down. This restaurant is on the 54th floor of the TD building. But we took all of our tenderloins downstairs and we went to a sister restaurant, which is about a block away. We opened up that restaurant. They're not open on Sundays. This was on a Sunday wedding. So we had to sort of break in and we grilled all the tenderloins and then we took them up and we did use our ovens that were working. So the grills were not working, but the ovens were working. And we still delivered our service and we were able to continue, flawlessly and to continue with the reputation that we were able to provide our guests excellent service. So this was an example of breakdown maintenance, okay? And that's just one example. And what I'm hoping that we can hear from you as well. So in the quote-unquote comments below or discussion board, you're going to come up with a scenario where there was some sort of breakdown, okay, in service, whether it was you as a guest or maybe as an employee. Now the question is, what did you end up doing? What was the solution? But more importantly, what do you think was the root cause of that scenario? And another really important question is, was it preventable? Okay, so make sure you include that in your discussion board. But going back to the canoe scenario, I discussed what the solution was, but what do you think that root cause was? You might ask questions. Well, how often was the grills maintained? Were they checked regularly? So, maybe that was something that was challenging, that we didn't do that properly. And, once we make sure we do that properly, when we probably could say, yes, it was preventable. So, that's something that you might want to consider when you are working on your own discussions. So this is what we mean by breakdown maintenance. And the reason why it's helpful to improve system reliability, because again, we're actually doing some sort of post-mortem. We are reflecting on the situation and, going back to that concept of continuous improvement. How can we get better? This is a great opportunity to do so. Okay, so that's really important. Now, of course, we mentioned the word preventable. The final method to improve system reliability is preventative maintenance, right? We've discussed breakdown maintenance, but of course, having a good preventative maintenance program where it's part of the sort of the checklist, part of the action of an operation manager is extremely relevant and helpful, so that you perhaps don't even need to deal with breakdown maintenance. Okay, so this is an example here of going through a sort of a checklist and making sure for the kitchen that we're following some sort of preventative maintenance schedule. In other words, we're trying to prevent any challenges or any breakdowns that might occur. Okay, and this is something that should be done on a regular basis. It might be done, on opening or closing duties. Some more examples here. Speaking of closing duties, okay, so again, this might be something done by either a server or maybe a manager. Okay, this is specific, looks like to a Chinese restaurant, okay, serving dim sum. But regardless, the point is we want to be making sure that our mise en place is ready. Okay, so it's not always about making sure our equipment is working, but also we just want to make sure that we are set for service. Because what we haven't really talked about too is service and what happens when service breaks down. And oftentimes it's because we're not prepared. We don't have enough stock on hand. We don't have enough mise en place to make sure that we can get through the service without any of that breakdown. Okay, so this is our third way to improve system reliability, is just making sure that you're prepared through preventative maintenance, whether it be checking if systems are working properly, or if it means whether or not we are prepared enough to have the right inventory on hand, making sure that our side stations are ready for service. All of that is part of that idea of preventive maintenance, making sure that either equipment or service will function properly. Okay. Now, one thing we also haven't discussed is this issue of costs. Okay. Now, we're not going to get into the actual numbers, but I can assure you that making sure that our maintenance and reliability, or at least we're practicing maintenance so that we can improve our reliability, will definitely reduce our costs as well. Okay, so it's very important, not just in terms of reputation, but also when equipment breaks down, it's much cheaper to repair it preventatively rather than if something breaks down and we need to repair it immediately. This is especially true when you're looking at stat days and equipment breaks. There's nothing worse than having to bring someone in and fix that on those days. And unfortunately, in the service industry, those are the days that are busiest. Those are the days where most likely we might have problems, when your glass washer isn't working or your dishwasher isn't working. The last thing you want to do is try and get someone in on those days. Okay, so really important to practice these ways to improve systems reliability. So remember, redundancy, have a backup, breakdown maintenance, make sure that you figure out what was the root cause so you can avoid it in the future. And then again, really, ideally, if we have good preventative maintenance schedules or programs in place, we can assure that we won't have things breaking down more regularly, and we're improving that reliability. So finally, what happened with the woman that wanted to leave the plane so badly? What was the big issue? Well, hopefully now you start to realize that having a good preventative maintenance schedule in place is also a good indicator of the type of establishment that you are. So, for instance, this is the reason why people go into the bathroom sometimes in restaurants to check if it is clean. There's this implication that if things are done properly in terms of cleaning your bathroom or cleaning an airplane, then that means they're also checking, the engine, they're checking the kitchen, they have the right food ingredients. All of that isn't connected. Okay, so with this lady, that's what her kind of perception was, is that if they can't even take the time to clean up, a coffee spill on a windowsill, then are they going to take the time to check the engines? Are they going to take the time to train their staff properly? Are they going to take the time to train their pilots properly? So those are the implications, and particularly in the service industry, there's a reason why we as guests are so particular about cleanliness. You see this on TripAdvisor. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that the entire hotel is going to go to shambles, but what it does mean is that people are taking pride in their work, and you have more confidence that you're going to have a positive experience. So consider that very, very important. Consider that. Take pride in your work when you are out there in the field, and every detail matters. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you shortly.